Hi friends, I wanted to do a quick video about Geoffrey Jackson's morning worship that I found on jw.org entitled Faithful with Material Things, taken out of Luke 16 verse 9, in which he's talking to Bethelites, okay? Bethelites who have signed a vow of poverty to slave for this organization. This talk is very interesting and it's somewhat cryptic. Makes me wonder if maybe there's something new that we are not aware of that may be coming out in the media. I don't know. Let me know. If you know something that I don't know, leave me a comment, okay? But anyway, it's very interesting. Check it out.
What is the real lesson behind this illustration that Jesus gave? Well, when they're reading the scriptures and read chapter 15 of Luke, they see of the so-called prodigal son or the wasteful son. And then, as they read on, they come to this illustration, dishonest use of funds. A rich man had a steward who was accused of handling his goods wastefully. He was accused. The Watchtower made the interesting comment that this doesn't necessarily mean to say he did something wrong, but he was accused of handling his goods wastefully.
I want to explain briefly what this parable is all about before I show you what Jackson has to say. All right, friends, I know there's a lot on this slide, but you're welcome to pause it to read it, but I'm going to go over it briefly. You see, the steward was in charge of the master's house in absence of the master. The steward, however, wasted the master's goods. In verse 2, the master finds out and asks him, "How is it that I hear this of you? Give an account of thy stewardship." So the guy gets fired in verse 2. In verse 3, the steward says to himself, "What shall I do?" Because he's going to be out of work. Okay, he lost his income. You see that in blue there? What's underlined? "I cannot dig. To beg, I am ashamed." So basically, he can't dig for whatever reason. So he can't do manual labor, or he refuses to. And he will be too ashamed to beg. In verse 4, he says, "I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship," meaning when I lose my job, "they, the debtors, may receive me into their houses." So if he loses his job, he has nowhere to live, and he's going to take advantage of the debtors and try to live with them. Verse 5, "So he called every one of his Lord's debtors, every one, and asked them, 'How much do you owe the Lord, my Lord?' And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said, 'Take thy bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. He did this to all of his debtors. So basically, he secured his future by making the debtors accountable to him. It appears that he stole from his master because he discounted all of their debts. What he was doing was securing his future, so that by discounting the debts of the debtors, they would feel obligated to him to help him when he was out of work. So that's the story so far. Back to Jackson.
It's interesting to note that the word used here for wastefully is the same word that's used in the previous illustration of the prodigal son in chapter 15, verse 13, where it speaks of the prodigal squandering the inheritance. Now, in that case, the prodigal or the wasteful son didn't steal the money from his father, did he? He received it in a legal way, but then the point was he squandered it. So likewise here we see that this steward was accused of wastefully using what was the master's. Did he say to him, "You're going to prison, or we're going to have a court case"? No. In fact, he didn't even immediately remove him from that position of authority. But what did he say to him? "You need to hand in the account." So in other words, the manager didn't really know what the steward was doing, but he allowed him the opportunity now to hand in this account. So when we look at the background of what actually was said here, and we think of it from the viewpoint of those who listened to Jesus, it seems that what the steward had done and then proceeded to do was actually legitimate and legal. He was concerned about his future. If he knew that he had to hand in an account that would result in him going to prison, then certainly he probably wouldn't have acted the way that he did. Well, to get the true understanding of this, it's good for us to take note of what the Watchtower, the November Watchtower of this year, and in the section that says, "Did you know?" it tells us that in biblical times, apparently a steward could be the manager or the one who ran a household or an estate. Oftentimes the owner would just leave everything completely to the steward to care for. Well, those that were listening to Jesus, what may they have thought about? Well, we don't know for sure, but perhaps they may have thought of this steward reducing the interest rate. Or perhaps he reduced his personal commission that was originally put on these loans. Or perhaps originally, in his enthusiasm, he overcharged them, and now he was reducing it down to the normal price. Whatever the case, we know that a steward who is a manager, like many managers today, have the right to write off certain debts completely and even forgive certain debts. So obviously then, as the Watchtower has pointed out, this steward still had full control and had the responsibility and the authority to be able to make whatever changes he saw fit. So that begs the question, was he dishonest? The New World Translation very accurately translates it this way in verse 8. And his master commended the steward, though unrighteous. You see, it doesn't say dishonest, it doesn't say he was a thief, although unrighteous because he acted with practical wisdom.
The unjust steward had wisdom because he planned for his future, his earthly future. He didn't do it well, but he planned for his future, whereas the prodigal son squandered his money but did not plan for his future on the earth. The unjust steward squandered his master's money. However, the prodigal son returned to the father. Thieves, such as this unjust steward, have such a love of money that they plan well to get it. They connive. They put a plan in place. How much better would it be that believers who stored up treasure in heaven could plan in the same manner? I think that's the moral of the story.
What would have been the right thing to do? To do things for the master. But in this case, he was doing something for himself. But what does this help us to see? Don't jump to conclusions. Read what the scripture says and don't get distracted by details that could take away from the beautiful lesson that we should gain.
It's too bad that Jackson doesn't see this. He ends his talk with a money grab, asking for more and more from the impoverished Bethelites and trying to implant something in their minds, somewhat of an encrypted message. I don't know. Anyway, take a look at how it ends.
And what is the lesson? Jesus tells us. Let's look in verse 9. Also I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the unrighteous riches, so that when such fail, they may receive you into the everlasting dwelling places. What's the lesson? We need to use our assets, our material assets, in a way that makes friends with Jehovah and Jesus. That results in something good. And we notice there in verse 9 it says, when these fail. It doesn't say if. And we realize as Jehovah's servants that eventually the commercial systems of this world will fail. Whatever money we have, whatever assets we have, it's just like this steward. They don't really belong to us, and soon we're not going to have them to use. So surely we would want to use them to Jehovah's praise and to make friends with Jehovah. So what assets do Bethelites have? Well, we have our own personal assets, few as they may be, but also we make use of the assets of the organization. Remember, we may not be tempted to be dishonest with those assets, but could we be wasteful with those assets? The person faithful in what is least, that is, with regard to material things and assets, is faithful also in much. And the person unrighteous in what is least is unrighteous also in much. What's the lesson? Don't get distracted by details. Step back and see what is the illustration telling us. And in this case, a beautiful reminder that we should use whatever we have to Jehovah's glory.
All right. Well, listen, I just wanted to show something to you out of this book, The New Creation. It is one of Russell's works. I think it's series 6 of his Studies in the Scriptures book. As you can see, I've pulled a lot of information out of this, but Watchtower has been on a money grab using fear as a tactic for a really long time. This book was written in 1913, if you can see that. I want to show you a couple of pages. You can read these pages, friends, but the first page on the left, it discusses using all of our talents, including money or property. It says that everything we have is the Lord's. And then in the second box, it says not to be wasteful of what is the Lord's, but to turn as much as possible of it into such channels as would be specially useful in the promotion of religious truths. Isn't that interesting? Look at the box on the right on page 578. It says, the thought would appear to be that every parent owes it to his child to give him more of a start in life than merely the imperfect, dying little body born into the world. Oh, the next box, to sum that up, says that parents should not leave their riches to their children because the siblings will quarrel over it. A child who has a reasonable education is well off and has a rich legacy in himself. And then lastly, look in the box. According to our expectations, the stress of the great time of trouble will be on us soon, somewhere between 1910 and 1912, culminating with the end of the times of the Gentiles, October 1914. So there you have it, friends. Watchtower more than 100 years ago was telling their followers, don't leave your inheritance to your children. They'll just fight over it. Give it to God. Sell your properties, your property talent. Give it to Watchtower. 1914, October specifically of 1914 is the end of the Gentile times. Nothing's changed. Watchtower is heartless, and all they're interested in is money, getting their money, even from the Bethelites. So let me know what you thought of Jackson's talk, friends. I hope you learned something today. Forget about Watchtower. They're lying to you, friends. Get out. Turn to Christ. He'll save you. Thanks for watching, friends. Have a great day.